And Barak Yahweh, Barakatha Yahusha, Barak Yahweh, Barakatha Yahusha, Ba'ashem, Rakakwadash, double honor to the apostles, the elders. Salutations to you, sincere brothers, teaching and truth and in sincerity. This lesson will be entitled, He Spoke as a Dragon. Lord will you are edified. Source, Fox Business. Article entitled, Over half of Americans are dipping into savings or going into debt to cover expenses. NRF. 72% of consumers in the lowest income category have to dip into savings, borrow money, or are going into debt. Published June 15, 2022. More than half of Americans are dipping into their savings, borrowing money, or going into debt just to cover their expenses. According to data from the National Retail Federation, consumers are facing a rise in cost across all categories from everyday goods to groceries and gas as we continue to face the highest rate of inflation in decades, according to the nation's largest retail trade group. In a recent survey conducted by the NRF, 47% of consumers said they have been switching to cheaper alternatives when looking for household necessities as they try and navigate the challenging economic environment. Just under half of those surveyed, 45% of consumers, are looking for coupons or sales more often for these items. Meanwhile, 41% of consumers are shopping at discount stores to find these everyday necessities. The data also showed that 40% of consumers reported that they were cutting back in other areas in order to afford these necessities. Still, even with these cutbacks, the survey revealed that 58% of consumers are still having to go into debt, borrow money, or use their savings to cover their expenses. About 72% of consumers in the lowest income category earning less than $25,000 a year are in the same boat, according to the data. Only 40% of consumers say they aren't enough to afford their expenses as inflation continues to outpace wage growth. Meanwhile, only 24% of consumers in the lowest income category say they can afford expenses. It is not sustainable, NRF CEO Matthew Shea said in a statement. Shea said removing China tariffs is the fastest way to alleviate some of the inflationary pressure in the U.S. economy. According to Shea, these tariffs have driven up prices for American consumers and are costing the average family over $1,200 a year. As you can see, things are getting worse. Hence, over half of Americans are dipping into savings or going into debt to cover expenses. And eventually, this is going to lead to two classifications of people, such as Revelation 13 and 16, and he, referring to the nobility of Edom, because they control this entire system, calls all, both small and great, rich and poor, as you can see, no middle. Hence, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a fill in the blank in their right hand or in their foreheads. And according to the data from National Retail Federation, 72% of consumers in the lowest income category have to dip into savings, borrow money, or are going into debt. Psalm 64 and verse 4, that they may shoot in secret at the perfect. The perfect are Israelites based on the lineage of our fathers, so-called Negroes, so-called Hispanics, and so-called Native Americans only, right? That they, referring to the nobility of Edom, they control this entire system. Hence, Revelation 13 and 16. And he caused, right, shoot in secret. One way they shoot a secret at the perfect is their legislation. All right, their so-called policies. Also, we can equate what? The two horns, known as today as the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. All right. Suddenly do they shoot at him and fear not. Verse 5. They encourage themselves in an evil matter. And this evil matter, this evil plan is going into what? Job 5 and 12. He disappoint the devices of the crafty. And this objective, wiping out the middle class, is an objective of the crafty. It's a device of the crafty. Job 5 and 12, he, referring to Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, disappoint the devices of the crafty. The crafty can also be classified as the nobility of Edom, so that their hands, meaning might, control, or will, cannot perform their enterprise, referring to the New World Order. Also can be identified as what? That evil matter or that evil plan. They commune of land snares, privily traps. Okay? Privily, such as wiping out the middle class, right? And much, much more. They say, who shall see them? And this is how prideful they are. However, Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, sees everything. Verse 6, they search out iniquities. Hence, according to the data from the National Retail Federation, 72% of consumers in the lowest income category have to dip into savings, borrow money, or are going into debt. Inflation continues to outpace wage growth. Now look at the data. Only 40% of consumers say they aren't enough to afford their expenses. Meanwhile, only 24% of consumers in the lowest income category say they can't afford expenses. This is searching out iniquities. Iniquities means what? Wickedness. They accomplish a diligent search. Both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep, meaning what? Cunning, crafty, right? So question for today's lesson. Where are the two horns? Right? Referring to Revelation 13 and 11. Because you have these dummies still out there voting, hoping for change, when the pattern is evident, meaning both parties do the bidding for the elite bankers. Revelation 13 and 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, this beast in the form of America. And he had two horns like a lamb, referring to your Democratic Party and your Republican Party. And he spoke as a dragon, meaning what? See, both parties make it seem like they are for the benefit or the welfare of the so-called American people. Hence, that representation both parties have as a lamb. However, when they speak as a dragon, and this is in the form of their legislation. Now, both candidates from both parties make it seem like they are for the benefit of the American people. So where are these parties now? Where are the two horns now? Okay. This is an example of he spoke as a dragon, meaning harsh, draconian. Why? Because they have an agenda, that evil matter. Lord, will you edify? Shalom.